Ethical dilemmas have been a subject of contemplation and debate for centuries. They challenge us to navigate complex moral terrain, forcing us to make choices that often involve conflicting values or principles. Philosophers, throughout history, have developed various approaches to help us address these dilemmas and make ethically sound decisions. In this narration, we will explore some of the key philosophical approaches to ethical dilemmas, including utilitarianism, deontology, virtue ethics, and relativism. Before we dive in, if you find this content valuable, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below. It truly helps us grow. Now, let's get started. Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism, with its emphasis on the consequences of actions, provides a pragmatic and straightforward approach to ethical dilemmas. Its central idea of promoting the greatest overall happiness appeals to our natural inclination to seek the greatest benefit for society. This perspective can be particularly useful in situations where the consequences are quantifiable and can be objectively measured. However, the criticism of utilitarianism stems from its potential disregard for individual rights and liberties. Critics argue that it may lead to a kind of tyranny of the majority, where minority interests are consistently sacrificed for the sake of the majority. This criticism highlights the need for a more nuanced ethical framework that can account for individual rights and justice alongside overall happiness. In practice, many ethical decisions require a delicate balance between utilitarian considerations and other ethical principles. For example, when crafting public policies, policymakers often need to weigh the overall societal benefit against potential harms to specific groups or individuals. Thus, while utilitarianism offers valuable insights into ethical decision-making, it is essential to consider its limitations and combine it with other ethical approaches to arrive at a more comprehensive and just resolution in complex ethical dilemmas. Deontology. Deontology, as championed by Immanuel Kant and other proponents, places a significant emphasis on the intrinsic rightness or wrongness of actions, regardless of their consequences. This approach offers a compelling counterpoint to utilitarianism by asserting that certain actions are inherently moral duties and should be followed irrespective of the outcomes they produce. The concept of the categorical imperative, a cornerstone of deontological ethics, underscores the universality of moral principles. It instructs individuals to act according to maxims that they can reasonably will to become universal laws. For instance, the prohibition against lying, a core tenet of deontology, reflects the belief that honesty is an absolute moral duty, even when lying might seem to yield better results in a specific situation. However, critics of deontology argue that its rigid adherence to moral rules can lead to situations where conflicting duties create moral dilemmas that seem irresolvable. For example, if a deontologist's duty to tell the truth conflicts with a duty to protect someone from harm, the framework offers little guidance on how to prioritize one duty over the other. In practice, deontology's focus on moral principles and individual rights remains a valuable tool for addressing ethical dilemmas. Nevertheless, it is important to acknowledge its limitations and consider the broader context and competing ethical principles when confronted with complex moral decisions. Striking the right balance between moral duties and ethical consequences is often the key to resolving such dilemmas. Virtue ethics. Virtue ethics, championed by philosophers like Aristotle, shifts the focus from specific actions or consequences to the development of virtuous character traits. According to this approach, the right course of action is the one that aligns with virtuous qualities, such as honesty, courage, and compassion. In ethical dilemmas, a virtue ethicist would consider what a virtuous person would do in that situation. For instance, if faced with a dilemma involving honesty, they would choose the path that reflects honesty as a virtue. Virtue ethics encourages personal development and the cultivation of character, but can be criticized for being somewhat vague and lacking clear guidelines for decision-making in complex situations. Relativism. Ethical relativism's departure from the notion of universal moral principles underscores the recognition that moral judgments are intricately tied to cultural and contextual factors. In ethical dilemmas, a relativist would approach the situation by considering the rich tapestry of cultural diversity and its influence on ethical perspectives. For instance, the practice of polygamy might be deemed morally acceptable in certain cultures but considered unethical in others. Relativism underscores that these judgments cannot be made in isolation but must account for the cultural and contextual nuances that shape them. Nonetheless, ethical relativism faces significant criticism for its potential to devolve into moral relativism, a position where all ethical judgments are viewed as equally valid, and there are no objective standards for assessing ethical decisions. This criticism highlights the challenge of striking a balance between respecting cultural diversity and upholding certain core ethical principles that transcend cultural boundaries. In navigating ethical dilemmas, individuals must grapple with these complexities, recognizing the importance of cultural sensitivity while also striving to uphold principles that ensure a common moral ground for addressing ethical challenges in our interconnected world. Balancing act, practical applications. In the real world, ethical dilemmas rarely present themselves in neatly defined philosophical categories. Instead, they often require a more nuanced approach that considers elements from multiple ethical frameworks. Imagine a scenario where a government faces an ethical dilemma regarding the allocation of limited healthcare resources during a pandemic. Utilitarianism may suggest maximizing the number of lives saved, deontology may emphasize the duty to protect individual rights, virtue ethics may call for decisions rooted in compassionate and just leadership, and relativism may consider the cultural and contextual factors that influence healthcare priorities. In such complex cases, decision-makers must engage in a delicate balancing act, weighing the various ethical considerations and striving to find a solution that aligns with the core values of society while also acknowledging the inherent trade-offs. Conclusion. Philosophical approaches to ethical dilemmas provide valuable frameworks for thinking critically about moral choices. Whether one leans toward utilitarianism, deontology, virtue ethics, or relativism, these philosophical perspectives offer guidance for navigating the complexities of real-world ethical challenges. Ultimately, the choice of which approach to employ may depend on the specific circumstances, the values held by individuals or society, and the willingness to engage in thoughtful reflection on the ethical implications of our actions. In a world where ethical dilemmas are a part of daily life, these philosophical perspectives continue to shape our understanding of what it means to make morally sound decisions.